I welcome you all for my today's class. So today we are going to discuss about the investigations in a female infertility case. So how to deal with a female infertility patient. We have already covered about the causes of the infertility, male causes, female causes, and causes in both. So today we will be dealing with the female causes, how to evaluate starting from the history, then how to investigate in a female infertility patient. So let's start. Yes. So we always should start any case with the proper history. So if history plays a very important role in the diagnosis of a condition. So here in a female patient, we have to diagnose the causes of infertility. So our thing should start proper with the fully or proper or correct history, you can say. So history includes the age, duration of marriage, history of the previous marriage with proven fertility if any are to be noted. Okay, these points are of important highlighted points, you can say. The age, duration of marriage, history of previous marriage if any with proven fertility means already, suppose if a lady is married already before, this is her second marriage, so she already had children with the first partner, that means she's fertile. So that is so all the marital history should be asked in detail. Then comes a general medical history. General medical history should be taken with special reference to the tuberculosis, sexually transmitted diseases, future suggestive of PID, pelvic inflammatory diseases, or diabetes. So all these general diseases should be asked. Then the history, surgical history. Surgical history should be directed specially towards the abdominal or pelvic surgery. Whether she has undergone any abdominal surgery before or any pelvic surgery, you have to ask in detail, because this is related with some pre-tubal adhesions. Because if she has already undergone certain surgeries, then we can get an idea of the adhesions. She might have got the trauma to certain organs, or there may be chances of any adhesions because of the previous surgeries. So this gives a hints towards that thing. Then menstrual history, obviously it is very important in any gynecological case. We have to take a thorough medical menstrual history, and it should be taken in detail. Okay, so here the important points related with infertility, on which you have to focus is the wide spectrum of abnormalities ranging from the hypomenorrhea, oligomenorrhea to amenorrhea are associated with the disturbed HPO axis, which may be either primary or secondary to adrenal or thyroid dysfunction. So we know the HPO axis plays a very important role in maintaining the normal physiology of a ovulation or menstrual cycle, you can say. But if a lady is having the history of hypomenorrhea, that means the less menstrual blood, or the periods last for less than 2 days, oligomenorrhea, if the cycles are infrequent, means she's getting late, she's not getting monthly or more than 35 days apart if the cycles are coming, or if she is having amenorrhea, that is absence of menstruation, regularly menstruation is not coming, or she is having the amenorrhea cases, then all these points indicates or hints towards a disturbed HPO axis, which may be primarily, that means the defect is seen in HPO axis, or it may be secondary to the adrenal and thyroid dysfunctions. So you have to ask in detail whether she is having any thyroid problem, hypothyroidism, she is having any adrenal related problem, any tumors, etc., or nowadays PCOS is common. That all those things you have to ask in detail. Then previous obstetric history, it is including the number of pregnancies, previous obstetric history if she has, because as I have explained in my previous classes, that infertility is of two types: primary infertility and secondary infertility. So in case of secondary infertility, the previous obstetric history is important. If she primary infertility, then she has never conceived before, so no need of asking any previous obstetric history. But in the secondary infertility, previous obstetric history plays a very important role. Why? Because there are chances of sepsis after undergoing the complications of pregnancy, like so you have to ask in detail about the number of pregnancies, the interval between them, and the pregnancy related complications are to be enquired. And then in the case of secondary infertility, the obstetric history is important. The history of puerperal sepsis may be responsible for ascending infection and the tubal damage. Uterine synechia may be due to the vigorous curettage. So if she has undergone any abortions, previous history of any miscarriages, she has undergone the D and C repeatedly, then there are chances of uterine synechia, that means the presence of adhesions in the uterus. So and there are again chances of ascending infection if she has had any puerperal sepsis, that is sepsis in her past puerperal period. Then there are again chances of getting the ascending infections, which may lead to the tubal damage or the tubal blockage, which is one of the cause of infertility. Tubes should be patent, otherwise it may cause infertility. Then contraceptive practice should be elicited. IUCD may cause PID, whether she has used any contraceptive before. So other contraceptives may not hinder with that fertility problem, but one contraceptive is there, which is IUCD, intrauterine contraceptive device, especially like copper devices, copper T, etc. They have a chance for they can, if suppose you have inserted copper T in a patient having the lower genital tract infection, then that with the help of a copper T, because the threads will be hanging there, so with the help of a thread, the infection can ascend up to the upper genital tract, that is uterus, tubes, etc. So copper T is contraindicated in a woman suffering from any genital tract infection. Even in the lower genital tract infection like vaginitis, cervicitis, you are not supposed to insert copper T. If you have inserted copper T in such cases, then there are chances of development of PID, pelvic inflammatory disease, in future. So it is contraindicated, and PID is one of the cause because it can damage the tubes, by it can block the tubes. There are chances of adhesions. That's why if adhesions and blockage is there, definitely the infertility will be there. Then sexual problems such as dyspareunia, loss of libido are to be inquired in detail. It should be borne in mind that the female orgasm is not essential for fertility, and the loss of semen from the vaginal orifice following the coitus is normal. Usually, few women give this complaint that the semen is not retained after the coital act, but you can convince them that this is a natural thing. Okay. However, it is uncommon to have pregnancy soon after the first visit. Not uncommon means after the first visit to a doctor, means after getting proper counseling by a gynecologist, there are more chances of the couple to conceive. So after first visit, the chances of conception increases. That means the couple should visit the gynecologist compulsory. Then detection of abnormalities of one factor does not negate investigation for another defect. Elsewhere, multiple defects may be present in the same case. For example, tubal defects may be associated with anovulation. So this is a common mistake which practitioners do. Suppose if they send patient for any USC, if they get some reason like any related anovulatory cycles and all, it doesn't mean that the cause is only the anovulation. There may be any other causes also. Suppose if she is having PCOS, suppose, so it's not necessary, we say that yeah, this case is because of PCOS, but we can also go for investigations for other factors like tubal defects, cervical factor. There may be multiple factors which are leading to infertility. So we should not be satisfied by getting the one cause of infertility, because there may be many causes in the same patient of infertility. This may occur, no, many causes, many factors can occur. She may be having the multiple defects. So you getting one defect, if you have confirmed or diagnosed one defect, so you cannot say the infertility is 100% because of this defect. It doesn't mean that you should not go for other investigation. You have to go for other investigation to rule out other factors also. So this is important. Then pregnancy following laparoscopy and dye test or HSG, hysterosalpingography, is not uncommon. See, this is also a very important investigations for the infertility, especially the HSG and dye test to detect the adhesions in the uterus, tubes, etc. The path outflow tract we have to check by this. By doing these procedures. So after doing these procedures, what happens is it is presumed that small flimsy adhesions or any mucus plug obstructing the tubal lumen is removed during such procedures, because we are passing a dye through the vagina inside the uterus, and it reaches to the fallopian tubes, thereby enters into the abdomen. So if you are passing something, then what happens with you are clearing in one way the small adhesions, the cervical spasm may be relieved during dilatation. So here also chances of pregnancy will be there after performing these tests. The next is the genital tuberculosis as a cause of infertility is to be kept in mind, especially in the developing countries. The association is as high as 10 to 15%, in contrast to a low figure of 0.5% in the developed countries. So genital tuberculosis is one of the important cause still in the developing countries. So you have to keep in mind, because TB is becoming less common nowadays, but you have to think about the genital tuberculosis also in the developing countries, because chances will be there to 10 to 15% of its presence. So this is also important. So now coming to the one by one factors, as we have covered already, there are many causes of infertility: ovarian causes, peritoneal causes, tubal factors, cervical factors, uterine factors, etc. So one by one we'll see and how to diagnose it. So first is about the ovarian factors. Ovarian dysfunction or dysovulatory is commonly associated with infertility are three main things will become in the ovarian factor. One is anovulation or oligoovulation. Oligovulation means infrequent ovulation. Ovulation is supposed to occur every month, that is every 28 days to 30 days duration. It should occur once every month, it should occur. But in anovulation, the ovulation is not at all occurring, and in oligovulation, the ovulation is infrequent, means it is occurring but it is not occurring regularly, or it is not occurring monthly. Then LPD is the luteal phase defect. I'll explain this in detail. There will be problem with the luteal phase. Then LUF, that is a luteinized unruptured follicle. So follicle is not ruptured in this case. So coming to the diagnosis of ovulation, this is very important. Anovulatory cycles plays a very important role, because ovulation is mandatory for the achievement of conception, because without ovum there is no chances of any fertilization. Okay, so how to diagnose whether the ovulation is occurring in the lady or not? So the various methods used in the practice to detect ovulation are grouped into three headings. One is the indirect methods, direct methods, and the conclusive methods. So there are three methods of the diagnosis of ovulation. This point is important: indirect methods, direct methods, and the conclusive methods. Okay, so coming to first the indirect method. So what are the indirect methods? Indirect or presumptive evidences of ovulation are commonly used in the clinical practice. They are inferred from the following, that is first with the menstrual history. Suppose if the cycles are regular, then we can say the ovulation is occurring regularly, but it is not 100% conclusive, but we may presume that thing. So these are called as the indirect or the presumptive evidences of ovulation. The second point is evaluation of peripheral or end organ changes due to estrogen and progesterone. So we can see the effect of estrogen or progesterone on the endometrium, on the cervical mucus, etc. So these are again the indirect evidences. Then the direct assays of the gonadotropin or the steroid hormones preceding, coinciding, or succeeding the ovulatory process. So you can measure the gonadotropin levels or the steroidal hormones level, you can measure during, before, and after the ovulation. So this gives, because hormone varies during the different phases of the menstrual cycle. So these are all considered as the indirect evidences. See menstrual history. The following features in relation to menstruation are strong evidences of ovulation. That is regular normal menstrual loss between the age of 20 to 35, it means the ovulation is occurring. And mid menstrual bleeding, spotting, or the pain or excess mucoid vaginal discharge can also hint towards the ovulation. Features suggestive of premenstrual syndrome or primary dysmenorrhea also suggest ovulation. See, this is an important point. Feature suggestive of PMS. PMS is occurring, means it means the cycle is ovulatory, and the primary dysmenorrhea in the girls, which also suggests that the cycles are ovulatory. So these are the points which says which gives indirect evidences of ovulation. Next is about the evaluation of peripheral or end organ changes. Before that, I'll say this table is important. See how to diagnose for ovulation: indirect methods, direct methods, and conclusive methods. So in the indirect method, first is the menstrual history, second is the evaluation of peripheral end organ changes, and third is by the sonography, which is the transvaginal sonography, TVS. So in the evaluation of peripheral or end organs, we will see about the BBT, basal body temperature, cervical mucus study, vaginal cytology, and hormonal assays and endometrial biopsy. Hormonal assays in that serum progesterone, LH, estrogen, urine, LH, etc. Sonography direct evidence will be there, and the direct evidence is through the laparoscopy only. See, I am using the word laparoscopy only because while doing laparoscopy we can directly visualize the ovum. So it is the only direct evidence of ovulation is with the help of laparoscopy. And third is the conclusive evidence. Conclusive evidence is with the help of pregnancy. If the woman becomes pregnant, so we can infer that the ovulation occurred, which is considered as a conclusive evidence of the ovulation. Okay. So now coming to the evaluation of the peripheral or end organ changes. First is about the BBT or the basal body temperature. So what is this BBT? See, all this occurs with the because of the different hormones which are secreted before and after ovulation. So with that change we can say this end organ changes results. Okay. So coming to the BBT observation, there is a biphasic pattern of the temperature variation in the ovulatory cycle. See, if the ovulation is occurring, then what happens? There is a biphasic pattern of temperature variation. Temperature varies in the both phases, that is in the follicular phase and that is in the luteal phase. That there is variation of the temperature. If the pregnancy occurs, the rise of temperature sustains along with the absence of the period. In anovulatory cycle, there is no rise of temperature throughout the cycle. That means in the ovulatory cycle, there is a rise of temperature. But in the anovulatory cycle, there is no rise of temperature throughout the cycle. Principle of the BBT is the rise of temperature is secondary to the rise in the progesterone output following ovulation. Progesterone is considered as thermogenic. The primary reason for the rise in the increase in the production and secretion of norepinephrine, which is also thermogenic. So progesterone is produced from the corpus luteum, you all know this, and it is produced only after ovulation. Corpus luteum is produced. So with the help of progesterone the temperature raises. So procedure, how to perform this BBT is, procedure is the patient is instructed to take her oral temperature daily on waking in the morning before rising out of the bed. We can ask patient to measure her temperature daily in the morning before rising out of the bed. The temperature is recorded on a special chart. A special chart is given to a patient and we can ask patient to record her temperature daily morning. Then days when intercourse takes place should be noted on the chart for better evaluation of the coital frequency. Interpretations: the body temperature maintaining throughout the first half of the cycle is raised to 0.5 degree to 1 degree Fahrenheit or 0.2 degree to 0.5 degree Celsius following ovulation. See, in the first half of the cycle, one temperature is maintained, but the temperature rises to 0.5 to 1 degree Fahrenheit in the second half, that is following ovulation. The rise sustains throughout the second half of the cycle and falls about 2 days prior to the next period, which is called the biphasic pattern. So in the first half of the cycle, temperature will be the same, but it raises 0.5 to 1 degree Fahrenheit in the second half, that is following ovulation, and it remains throughout the second half of the cycle, only it falls 2 days prior to the next period. So this is called as a biphasic pattern, and there will be a drop in the temperature to about 0.5 degree Fahrenheit before the rise and almost coincide with either LH surge or the ovulation. So when it rises, it corresponds to the LH surge or with the ovulation. Ovulation occurs on the 14th day, and before the ovulation LH surge occurs. So after LH surge only the ovulation occurs. So this rise corresponds either to the LH surge or to the ovulation. The demonstrable rise actually occurs about 2 days after the LH peak and with a peripheral level of progesterone greater than 5 Ng per ml. So what it is, clinical importance: maintenance of BBT chart during investigation is of help in determining ovulation and timing of postcoital test, endometrial biopsy, cervical mucus or vaginal cytology study for ovulation. It also helps the couple to determine the most fertile period if the cycle is irregular. Limitations of BBT: it indicates ovulation in a retrospectively way. It cannot predict the ovulation precisely with time. Rarely the ovulation has been observed through BBT is monophasic. So there is a rare chances of monophasic pattern also. How long to keep the record? It should not be continued for more than 3 to 4 months. for investigation purpose. However, it has to be maintained for longer periods during management of ovulation induction. So this is a chart, BBT or biphasic chart. Temperature in Fahrenheit, you can see here, this chart you can maintain, and around the time of ovulation the temperature slowly rises, you can say, and it falls down just prior to 2 days before getting the next menstruation. So this is a BBT or basal body temperature chart. So next is about the cervical mucus study. Alteration of the physiochemical properties of the cervical mucus occurs due to the effect of estrogen and progesterone. Disappearance of Fern pattern beyond 22nd day of the cycle, which was present in the mid-cycle, is suggestive of ovulation. See, Fern pattern, if present and it disappears beyond 22nd day, is which was present in the mid-cycle, is a suggestive of ovulation. Persistence of Fern pattern even beyond 22nd day suggests anovulatory cycles or anovulation. Ovulation is not occurring. So it should not persist after 22nd day if ovulation is there. Progesterone causes dissolution of the sodium chloride crystals. Following ovulation, there is loss of stretchability. Spin bucket test, which we have already covered, which was present in the mid-cycle. Then next is about the vaginal cytology. Maturation index shifts to the left from the mid-cycle to the mid-second half of the cycle due to the effect of progesterone. However, a single smear on the day 25 or 26 of the cycle reveals features of progesterone effect if ovulation occurs. So next about the hormone estimation. Serum progesterone. Estimation of the serum progesterone is done on the day 8 and 21st of a cycle, of a 28-day cycle. An increase in the value from less than 1 ng per ml to greater than 6 ng per ml suggests ovulation. The serum LH, daily estimation of serum LH at the mid-cycle can detect the LH surge. Ovulation occurs about 34 to 36 hours after beginning of the LH surge. It coincides about 10 to 12 hours after the LH peak. Then next is about the serum estrogen level. Estrogen hormone you have to measure. It attains the peak rise approximately 24 hours prior to the LH surge and about 24 to 36 hours prior to ovulation. The serum LH and the estradiol estimation is used for IVF, for in vitro fertilization. Then urinary LH. LH kits are available to detect mid-cycle LH surge. Ovulation usually occurs within 14 to 26 hours of the detection of urinary LH surge and almost always within 48 hours. So the test should be done on a daily basis. It is started 2 to 3 days before the expected surge, depending on the length of the cycle. Then next about the endometrial biopsy. Yes, endometrial biopsy means here the endometrial tissues are taken to detect ovulation. It can be easily obtained as an outpatient procedure OPD with the help of instruments like Sherman curettage or Pipelle endometrial sampler. Dilatation and curettage is however reserved in cases where the bulk endometrium study is needed. Only with the help of a Pipelle or Sherman's curette we can take a small bit of the endometrium and we can observe it under the microscope. When to do? Biopsy is to be done on the 21st to 23rd day of the cycle. Barrier contraceptives should be prescribed during the cycle to prevent accidental conception. However, if the cycle is irregular, it is done within 24 hours of the period. Findings: evidence of the secretory activity of the endometrial glands in the second half of the cycle gives not only the diagnosis of ovulation but it can predict the functional integrity of the corpus luteum. See, we have covered how the changes will be there in the endometrium according to the different phases. So in the luteal phase, the endometrium is prepared. The secretory changes of the endometrium start. So those secretory changes we can see in the biopsy of the endometrium if it is done on the 21st or 23rd day of the cycle. And subnuclear evacuation is the earliest evidence of the ovulation, which is appearing about 36 to 48 hours following the ovulation. So we can find the subnuclear evacuation. Causes of secretory changes are due to the action of progesterone on the estrogen primed endometrium. The last point in the indirect evidences is the sonography or sonography or TVS, USG. Serial sonography or TVS scan, transvaginal sonography during the mid-cycle can precisely measure the Graafian follicle just prior to ovulation. The Graafian follicle size reaches about 18 to 20 mm. It is particularly helpful for confirmation of ovulation following ovulation induction, artificial insemination, and in vitro fertilization. The features of recent ovulation are, there are two main features of the recent ovulation. One is the collapsed follicle and another one is the fluid in the pouch of Douglas, POD. If you find the fluid in the pouch of Douglas and the collapsed follicle, it indicates that the recent ovulation has occurred. So these are all the indirect evidences of ovulation. Next is about the direct evidence, which is nothing but laparoscopic visualization. Directly with the help of laparoscope, we can visualize the recent carpus luteum or detection of ovum from the aspirated peritoneal fluid from the pouch of Douglas is the only direct evidence of ovulation. So directly visualizing the carpus luteum or the ovum through the laparoscope is the only direct method of visualization of the ovulation. And the third method of the ovulation is the conclusive method, which is nothing but the pregnancy. Pregnancy is the surest evidence of ovulation. It is a surety that ovulation has occurred. So these are about the diagnosis of the ovulation. How to diagnose? There are three methods: indirect, direct, and the conclusive. So after ovulation, two main points are there in the ovulatory dysfunction. One is the LPD, luteal phase defect, and another one is LUF, that is the luteinized unruptured follicle. So coming to LPD or LPD, luteal phase defect. So diagnosis of LPD is difficult. However, it is based on the following: BBT chart. With the help of BBT chart and biopsy and seroprogesterone, with these three methods we can diagnose LPD. First, with the BBT chart, here what happens is slow rise of temperature taking 4 to 5 days following the fall in the mid cycle. This is the one point. Second point is rise of temperature sustains less than the 10 days. That means it rises and it again falls soon. So these are the two things we will find in the BBT in case of luteal phase defect. And another method is with the help of endometrial biopsy. Biopsy done on the 25th and 27th day of the period reveals the endometrium at least 3 days out of the phase. Suppose if the biopsy is done on the 25th day of the cycle, the endometrium change corresponds to the 22nd day, means 3 days lag, you can say 3 days out of the phase it is. So this lag phase endometrium must be proved in more than one cycle. However, it is not conclusive again. So lag phase endometrium for more than one cycle, if we found in through the endometrial biopsy, it gives a hint about the LPD. Then third is the serum progesterone estimation, which is done on the 8th day following ovulation, is less than 10 ng per ml. So this is all about LPD, how to detect or how to diagnose LPD, luteal phase defect. Next, about the LUF, that is luteinized unruptured follicle. It is a syndrome which refers to an infertile woman with regular menses and presumptive evidence of ovulation without the release of the ovum from the follicle. See, ovulation is occurring but the ovum is unable to release from the follicle. It is trapped inside the Graafian follicle itself. So trapped ovum will be there. So this condition is called as the luteinized unruptured follicle. And the features of ovulation, that is the formation of carpus luteum and its stigma are also absent here. It is often associated with the pelvic endometriosis. So LUF cases can be seen in cases of the pelvic endometriosis. How to diagnose this is, in the presence of biological effects of progesterone in the early luteal phase, first with the help of sonography, persistence of echo-free dominant follicle beyond 36 hours after the LH peak, you will find the this dominant follicle still, because it should get ruptured. But if you are seeing the follicle still after the LH peak still 36 hours after getting the LH peak, then it gives a hint about the luteinized unruptured follicle. Then laparoscopy, failure to observe a stigma of ovulation. Then third method is with the help of ovarian biopsy. Conclusive proof is determination of the ovum amidus, the structure of the carpus luteum, is directly doing the biopsy and seeing the carpus luteum, and in the carpus luteum if you find the ovum inside only, the trapped ovum is seen in, and then you can say it is a case of LUF, luteinized unruptured follicle. So these are the different methods how to diagnose ovulatory dysfunction in a female patient. So about the different other method, other causes, tubal factors and all, we will see in our next class. So thank you.